Emotional algebra, where the heart meets the math. What is integral is derivative as you figure out your path. Power plus emotions equals more than you can see. Listening to the wisdom of
Welcome to Emotional Algebra with Dr. E. I'm your co-host, Andrew Tavani.
And I'm Dr. E.
Dr. E, good to see you again. We have a great show planned for today. Special guest who's here. But before we bring her in, we want to do an update on a previous guest who was on the show.
Yeah, as many of you may remember, I've had Luckner on a few times. He's my brother from another mother in Haiti. He was telling us all about the circumstances of what's been going on in Haiti, how he had to flee Port-au-Prince area, then had to flee Mibale. He was in Inch, and he feels like he needs to get to Brazil. So he had to take a bus down to Port-au-Prince, and that had to actually go around the outside of the country. So they went around the coast rather than down through the middle, because the main arteries or intersections of the roads are controlled by gangs. So he made it down to Port-au-Prince and did an interview with the consulate there for Brazil. And they have to do that to have their interview, and then they wait 3 months or so. So he then got on the bus and came back, and they were coming back on their way back up to where he's staying in Inch, and there was a bus accident. And in that bus accident, he had broken his arm and dislocated an elbow, and that was 6 weeks ago. So in that, with the challenges with healthcare in Haiti, two very vast opinions from two doctors, and the long story, or the shorter, is he had dislocated an elbow, broken I think it was his tibia, but in the process they couldn't keep his elbow back in the joint, so it kept dislocating. He just had surgery the other day. He's healing. He sent me pictures though of what it looks like with his healing. And just again, we are so fortunate for the healthcare that we have. And while his surgery was hundreds of dollars, a few $100 there to get this, hopefully the surgery done correctly, the quality of healthcare and just looking at his circumstances looks pretty tough. He has to, pay for the hospital stay and all those things like that. So no insurance. So I'm hoping that he's going to be healing well. He was in absolute misery, could barely use his arm for all this time. And I just think it's important to keep people updated on what's going on in other parts of the world, especially Haiti, because it is a country that shouldn't have to go through what it's going through. It is our neighbor. And in any country, there are absolutely amazing, wonderful people who want to make a difference and who want to help their countrymen. He just feels like he can't stay and survive. He fears for his life every day that he's there because of the circumstances there, which is really tough.
Yeah. Sad to hear that, Dr. E. Luckner is a guy who was born into a very tough situation, but I mean, when he was on the show, what a terrific attitude he has, and just an amazing positive outlook despite being in a very tough situation. So
absolutely,
it's hard to hear that he has to be going through this, and I'm imagining him actually with his great spirit, trying to get through this the best he can. But
yeah, and my view, life happens for us, not to us, no matter what. And he shares that. We talk about that. I've been talking to him since obviously before, but since the bus accident, and he's like, I'm where I'm supposed to be right now, and I feel like I need to be somewhere else for my safety. Whereas I'll always want to come back to Haiti. I love the people. I love my country. I don't love what's happening. That's the tough situation that he's experiencing.
Yeah. Very tough. Well, thanks for that update, and keep it updated. Keep the listeners updated and the viewers updated as things go on. Hopefully that surgery will be successful, and at least that part of things can not be a strain on his life.
Right. And, and I think, we'll have him on the show again, just to really talk about his experience. And even he still has yet to tell me about the bus ride. He said the bus ride was at times a bit harrowing and scary, the things they had to go through and getting stopped by gangs and things. So there's more to report on that when we can talk about it.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, switching gears to today's episode, we have a special guest, as I mentioned, Susan Hendricks, who is the host of Headline Crime Podcast. And Susan's an Emmy-winning journalist, an author, and an advocate who is, you probably know her from her work with HLN and CNN, and mostly for her true crime reporting. You may even have seen her on HLN's Weekend Express and CNN's AC360, hosted by Anderson Cooper. Her coverage of the Delphi murders and other high-profile crime cases established her as a leading voice in victim advocacy. And she's actually in a leadership role at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. As I mentioned, she now hosts her own podcast called Headline Crime. Really fascinating podcast. Had a chance to watch it. So let's bring her in. Welcome to Emotional Algebra, Susan Hendricks. Great to have you here.
Hi, it's great to see you both. And I know I was on HLN for years with Dr. E. That's how I get to know you. And Andrew, it's been great meeting you as well. I'm excited to be on.
Yeah, thank you for doing it. Appreciate it.
It feels like an honor to return that favor of now you're a guest on what I'm working, what I've been doing. So it feels like an honor to return that and to have you be a part of the show. So thanks for being here.
Well, it's good to see you. I've been watching too, and it really is just helpful, everything you talk about, because our everyday life, how we choose to live, who we interact with is all about our emotions and how we experience life. So I've learned a lot from you as I've watched.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. Thanks for being a part of that and part of the journey. So, and again, we're looking forward to speaking with you. I am, I want to hear a little bit about your pivot from doing reporting. And, we were I think one of the first times we met was on the Sandy Hook shootings. And that was such a tough day for I think even just thinking about that, I still tear up thinking about that, but also my appreciation for what you all as anchors went through in reporting that and having to on air, at the time, keep that sense of stoicism reporting the news and then seeing what was happening in the breaks and the times of humanness and the times of feeling and then pulling it all together. In watching one of your recent podcasts, you talked about how you've learned to compartmentalize, and the part of your career was compartmentalizing. But coming back to how did you pivot from doing the news correspondent work and reporting to then getting into the true crime?
Well, I think that happened because of where our news cycle was going. And back to Sandy Hook, I remember sitting on the couch with you there. It was so horrific. And you mentioned compartmentalizing, and you could do that. And then I think because they were so young, the little kids, and then you think of your own kids and you see the parents, that it's just so at times you kind of catch yourself, because in the news we're taught it's who, what, why, where, when, but you never put yourself. It's not about you. It's about the story you're telling. And that was very difficult. During the pivot, I believe, was when we covered Casey Anthony, that trial, and Nancy Grace was at HLN. It was kind of the peak of true crime. It certainly, if the viewers or listeners remember the O.J. Simpson trial, if they watched that I think became kind of must-see TV, if you will. So people were engaged with that and watching every single day. And then I believe that happened with Casey Anthony, that everyone was watching. Was she guilty? Was she not? And listening to Jose Baez and seeing the family. So that really was the peak of HLN's coverage in terms of trials. And I think from there, the network kind of shifted to all crime. We did Jodi Arias afterwards. So we almost became like a court TV, if you will, except Morning Express with Robin Meade remained the same, like the continued. But then once the afternoons hit, Michael Lanos had a crime show, and we just stayed on that line. So I think organically the network kind of followed what the people wanted, if you will. And that's how I've kind of switched gears. And then they sent me to Delphi, Indiana to cover that double murder there. And I recently in October covered the trial last October. Can't believe it's almost a year, but the trial there. So, and I got close to the families, and really that's kind of become the stories I follow most are the crime.
Susan, do you feel like sort of your career path has been guided almost by audience interest. Is that what you're saying there? Just the way that HLN sort of responded to what the audience was responding to, and then you kind of were in the midst of that and just sort of rode that wave.
That's a great question because it really does come down to, especially network news and during that time, ratings. Who's watching and why? And the ratings were never so high as they were with Casey Anthony. And
Yeah.
that's a great question because I'm asked that a lot. I got to know Joe Petito through the years, Gabby Petito's father, who was murdered, Gabby Petito, by her boyfriend, Brian Laundrie. And he got that question so many times, like, why were the networks saturated with Gabby Petito? Is it because she looked a certain way? Does the media discriminate in terms of what stories they follow and what comes first? Are people watching, or is the media picking and choosing? And so their family, the mom, dad, stepmom, stepdad, and they're all friends, four of them. I recently saw them at CrimeCon. They have literally changed laws to make it so everyone gets the same attention, meaning for the families to have the resources that they had through the news media to cover that. So I'm not really sure exactly how that worked. I do know, though, with Casey Anthony, it was certainly about the numbers. If there weren't
Sure.
any numbers, we would have stopped covering it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So from the cases that you've been able to cover, how difficult is it to get involved with some of the families and to meet some of the families? You're obviously earning their trust. And I think that's part of just who you are as a person. You've always been very approachable, very warm, want to connect to people. What's that been like to connect to some of these family members who have experienced these traumatic experiences?
I have an interesting story about Joe Petito, how I got to know him. I was covering the Delphi trial. It was late at night at HLN. And to be honest, I was spending so much time there. It was HLN during the day. I'd go home for maybe an hour, come back at night to do AC 360. I was there all the time. And I remember the producer saying, here's Joe Petito's number. It was during the time that I believe they had found Gabby's remains. We wanted to get Joe Petito on the show. So I left him a voicemail, and I'm walking out to my car and the phone rings and it's Joe Petito. And he says, hey, Susan, it's Joe. And I just said, thank you so much. And the body cam, I believe, came out of Gabby Petito. And so I was so tired and so burnt out that I started to cry. And he was consoling me and saying, don't worry, it's okay. And it was embarrassing on my end, but it also allowed me to realize just how great that family was. And I think what I've learned through the years is that they just want, it's the worst day of their lives for these families. And so they just want, I connect with them because I like them and I feel for them. And it's less about the story, even though it is a story. And so you get to know them as people, and it's the worst day in their lives and they have to keep moving on. So if anything, I gain strength from what I've learned through them. So my personal experience has been that I formed these connections through the stories I tell, but I continue to keep in touch because I like them.
Are they able to share their emotion and their deeper feelings and even expression of emotion with you at times as you've gotten to know them?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And an example of that is Kelsey. She was she is Libby's sister, and Libby is the story that I wrote the book on, the Delphi double murder. Her younger sister. She was only 14 when she was murdered. And Kelsey and I still talk, and we're still friends. Kelsey was only 18 at the time. Now she's married. She has two little girls. So we talk, and she talks about what she goes through. And believe it or not, it's hard to believe, but in the world of true crime, there are people on the other side who, because we have so many outlets now, and I always say it's great because everyone has a voice, and then it can be bad if everyone has a voice, because there are people that say something so shocking that they just want the clicks or the eyeballs, and they don't care how they get it. I could equate it to kind of my grandma yesteryear of the Inquirer, just the shocking alien stories on the front would be, oh, the sister's involved. And it's just so, I hate even saying it, but it's out there. There are people out there, but most are journalists who are covering the story and would never say such a thing. But that has taken a toll. So I have gotten to know these families, and I was just at CrimeCon again with the Delphi families, and Mike said on stage, Kelsey's grandfather, it's forever haunting her, because if she goes for a job, they're going to see that. And I said, because I truly believe people don't believe that. And it's really the minority, but you can't really believe that there's people out there like this, but there are. And the family just kind of moves on and has learned to kind of ignore it.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do these families move on from these types of crimes? I mean, that Delphi murders crime was so heinous and disturbing. And how does a sibling like that, who was young herself when it happened? You said now she's married and has 2 young kids. How do you think she does that?
Yeah, I think she has such a great family and support group, but they never move on. There's no such thing as closure. It's devastating every day. And recently her post was saying, Libby, I see your smile in her, and I'm paraphrasing here with her youngest, but she said it's a very weird time. So I think she has a lot of support online too, and is able to just say how she's feeling, because it was a 30-day trial. I was there every single day. And for those watching that didn't follow the trial or the case, it was no cameras in the courtroom, but the crime scene photos at one point were leaked. So it's been horrific for the families. And again, I gain strength just seeing them live and move on and take it day by day. And I remember her grandmother saying to me, Susan, I didn't want him taking me down too, because she said, we have a way that we can get through this, meaning survive for Libby, or let it take us down, whether it's in hating him so much that becomes your identity, just the hate and the anger. And I could see doing that. It's normal to think that's what would happen. Especially being in that courtroom, you look over at the guy arrested for it, who admitted to doing it, who did it, and it's just anger. So they aren't living in that space. They don't have, not to say they don't have bad days, but they move on and they continue to live for Libby and Abby.
You know, last week Andrew and I did an episode, just aired actually today. It was on time thieves, and I talked about grief being a time thief. And my personal experience was when I was 8, my brother died, and I carried that with me for years until I did my therapy in my early 20s and realized all the anger and rage, but also all the guilt and shame and that I felt for feeling like I was supposed to live in his footsteps. So the reason I bring that up is when I talk about grief, I say that people hold on to grief as long as they either need to and or choose to. And I know that can sound very dismissive, because even after the show, I did think about our interview this week and listen to how to some people who have been through different experiences of loss. My brother's loss was just an accident. You know, other people's losses, like you're experiencing, are more tragic losses that people feel they have no control over, that they're thinking about, how did this person leave this world? I even remember hearing in one of the interviews yesterday how they found in the forensic evidence that one of the girls seemed to have a tear from one of the smudges on her face, that there were tears that she was experiencing. So you think about and you feel the emotion of this person that has been lost to you and how they left this world. And if you are a parent or a sibling, somebody who loves that person, to know that their last feelings or thoughts might have been what they've been, makes it very difficult to let go. And as you said, find closure, find peace. And therefore, often people carry that guilt, that survivor's guilt, and they carry that feeling of helplessness and the sadness and the pain in that grief. And that can feed hatred, because, as I say, hatred protects. It pushes us away from things that have caused us pain, are causing us pain, and or could cause us pain. You know, rage protects us by when we feel a loss of integrity or fear of our life. So we have the combinations of these emotions in this complex experience of grief. So I say that to kind of help people to understand, if they are watching these episodes, realizing it's not as easy sometimes. It's just saying, okay, I'm done. And I think that's what you're seeing and you're experiencing. And you're probably seeing a range of different responses maybe too, because I know in the Idaho, the Idaho murders, that there were some family members like, we've moved through this, and some were still stuck in that rage and anger and hatred, which does become the time thief to live in the moment. But I kind of would love to hear your thoughts on that and what you've seen in the range of responses.
There's one thing I know for certain is that every family's different in how they grieve and how they process what has happened, and they're still processing, they're still grieving, and they're still trying to understand and get through the anger. You're right, because it is the thief of time, and it is kind of maybe like a guard, as you said, on how they deal with it. I was at the Brian Koberger sentencing hearing, and I found this to be really healing, just being a spectator, the victim impact statements, to read those to the killer, to Brian Koberger. And we saw it was Kaylee Gonzalez's sister, Olivia, how, I mean, it was so powerful to listen to that. And it went step by step of, she said she did research beforehand about everything, and calling him things that she knew would bother him, like you're weak, you're not so smart, you're average, you're this, you're that. And being in there, I was in that courtroom, and when she was done, everyone started to clap. It was just the normal reaction, because it's fine. It gives the power back, I believe, to the family members. And it's one time, because they feel so powerless when their loved one is taken from them during a crime. And Kim Goldman, who I was lucky enough to meet through the years, Ron Goldman's sister of the O.J. Simpson case, and she messaged me about that. She said, I wish the victim impact statements were televised. And Kelsey, the sister who I mentioned, Libby's, said to me, texted during the trial, oh my gosh, if you see the family members, tell them I'm thinking about them, because they have something in common and they're part of a club no one wants to be a member of. It's their moment. And the victim impact statements in Delphi, they weren't televised, but I was there listening, and they were able to say to his face, because of you, this is generational trauma. You didn't know who Libby was or who Abby was. I mean, I found that to be, based on my perspective, cathartic for the families. And I'm happy they got that chance, even though certain cases, and of course with Brian Koberger, it didn't seem like he was phased at all, and maybe he's not. But I think it's more for the families than for that person.
Yeah. Do you think it's even a little bit like in the case of Koberger, for instance, his plea deal got him essentially out of the death penalty. So do you think that this was at least some way for the families to give some sort of punishment that they will feel like is, fits the crime in some way?
Absolutely. And I think the way that whole case was handled was not, I usually don't judge I don't know exactly what goes on in every single county or state, but it just wasn't handled well. The family wasn't notified about the plea deal until just, I think, 24 hours before. They didn't know. And Kaylee Gonzalez's father has been angry. He wants to fight. And so that's kind of his way. And I got to meet Ethan Chapin's mom, Stacy Chapin, who they didn't go to the victim impact statement. They said, we want to have a celebration of Ethan's life somewhere else. We don't want to see him. So everyone handles it differently. But what they didn't tell them was, and it was only, I believe, the day before Steve Gonzalez found out how many times his daughter was stabbed, and information that they wanted to know. And they had to file FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, in the courts, just like the media, to get the filings. It was just bizarre. So I even though, if you're lucky enough where this hasn't happened to you, you think that the families are kind of holding hands with law enforcement along the way, and that's not always the case. And that could even make it more difficult for the families. But in the Delphi case, I recently, during CrimeCon, I also interviewed the lead detective at the time and the prosecutor, Nick McClelland. They did work hand in hand with the families, because sometimes the families come second or third, or kind of aren't even really thought of really by law enforcement. All eyes are on the case then, and maybe they have to compartmentalize by that, but not including them, to me, is kind of infuriating. So with the Koberger case, I found that to be bizarre. But right, so once they were in the courtroom in the victim impact statements, I believe it was their time to say what they wanted to say. And I believe that it was healing, because there was a break after Steve Gonzalez went, and then his daughter, there was a 10-minute break. And I could just see it in Kaylee's father's face, in the hall, we got him. Even if it was in a tiny way, we got, and you try to look at his face and think, is he bothered? Look at his temple. Is he this? Is he that? And we always hear why. Like the question is always asked, like, why would someone do that? Why? What's the motive? We'll never understand it. And even if we hear a motive because he was angry as a teenager, I'm making that up, that it never, ever, ever makes sense. So you don't really get what you want from the person who's found guilty of doing this, but I believe you get it from saying how you feel and letting them know who this person was, whether they care or not.
Now, with the Koberger case, I just as an observer of it, I found that I was very unsatisfied because we didn't really get a motive. Do you think that anyone at like us armchair observers but even the family will ever get one? What, like, is that something would you interview someone like Koberger to try to get to the bottom of that and see if you could get him to admit that?
I don't think I would. But I would be interested, I guess, in hearing why. But I think of it from Stacey Chapin's point of view and watching that guy on the screen. I don't think I would. As a journalist, I'm supposed to say yes, I would, but I don't really think I would. But I understand wanting to know kind of why he did it. And I remember early on in the investigation, it was so weird to me. I think it was the coroner who was speaking out to the media. You never hear that. Or the medical examiner saying they were all sleeping. It turns out they weren't sleeping. It turns out that now we're seeing so much of what we're seeing that the information just wasn't there. And no community is ever expecting something that gets worldwide attention and all eyes are on law enforcement there. But I remember Kaylee's father saying that she thought she was being stalked in the days and weeks before. Now I'm piecing it together. I've been on Nancy Grace's show discussing this with experts who talk about it. And to me, it appears that whatever motive, so maybe that's not a motive, but I think he was there at the school that I believe is 30 minutes away from King Road, where he was getting his PhD. I believe he was looking for someone to do this to. And he found, I believe, Kaylee or Maddie, who knows. And let's say he does talk, let's say he is interviewed. I looked back on a Ted Bundy interview from the past, and it was the night before his execution, he was interviewed. And I don't know if I believed any word out of his mouth. So if Koberger did speak, would it be self-fulfilling for him and not really for the families? Who knows? I think of Jorn Vandersloot when Beth, for those not familiar with the case, her daughter disappeared in Aruba for spring break and never came home.
Right, Natalie Holloway.
Yeah. And for years, it took over her entire life, Beth. And she met with Jorn Vandersloot, who was arrested for it, and kept asking why or tell me. I believe he was even paid to tell the story. I'm not sure by who, but so he told Beth what he said happened in terms of what happened on the beach that day and why he killed Natalie. But I don't know and not to say that wouldn't happen to me. I have a daughter. Maybe that would become my life to figure out why. But I don't know if you ever really believe the sociopathic psychopath killer, anything.
Yeah, Vandersloot seemed to be especially treacherous and manipulative. He has been throughout. I mean, I guess he's still although he was in the U.S. recently, wasn't he?
He killed again. Remember, I believe Stephanie Flores.
That's right. Yes.
The date. Maybe she asked him about it. We don't know. But in the hotel room, and you see surveillance of him coming in and out. I mean, and he came from a family of, I believe, the dad was in politics or
well-to-do family.
Yeah, and nothing like this had happened in the past. That's what I think is so shocking to people and myself. It turns out in Delphi that the killer's Richard Allen, who was he worked at CVS, a father of a young 20s daughter, married. So it's not the person you think it might be. And I always say this, but it's true that they never really look like the monsters they are. And it could be your neighbor, and you would have no idea. And they could have no history. No criminal history that we know, like Brian Koberger and getting his PhD. And when you think of BTK, I've interviewed his daughter, Carrie Rawson, who's just a great person and considering what she went through. But she would tell me, Susan, he told me, make sure you fill up your tires and cook her scrambled eggs for breakfast and then go on a murderous rampage for decades. So you never really know who the person is. And that's why what the fascination maybe is of who is it? Can we tell? How do we keep ourselves safe? And do you ever really know?
Right, right. And I even remember hearing that that in the interview you did with her, she said her dad said, even make sure you check their credentials to make sure they're real, and yet he was doing some of those same things of impersonating. So in that,
Fake badge,
yeah,
projection, best,
yeah,
right?
exactly. So I think one thing that as we look at the situation here, I always talk about how we have many parts and pieces of ourselves. And some of those parts, if we have these fragmented selves and we only can show one part to the world at a time, there are people who are really good at showing the part they want the world to see. In other words, their ideal self. Meanwhile, depending on what emotional constellations they've had inside their whole life and potentially genetic predisposition, some people think sociopathy has a genetic predisposition. You look at how they're able to play these different roles while these other parts of them are basically bubbling and growing in power and in strength in ways. And I really think sometimes it is a battle in their conscious and unconscious and their defenses to say, how do I let this part of me out? Do I let it out? I shouldn't let it out, which gives it power because we're opposing the parts of us that want expression. So when we look at it from that standpoint of having these different pieces and parts that come out, and often when we see some of the crime movies that are reenacted, you see some of these things where the person all of a sudden there's a look in the change in their eye, there's an expression that comes on their face, there's a trigger externally. That's no different than all of us. The degree is the emotions that come with that, the belief systems that surround that. And I really feel that if we fostered environments where kids and young adults could really talk about the things and felt safe to talk about these emotions and issues that were bubbling without fear of feeling judged, rejected, abandoned. I can't tell you how many young adults that I talk to about things that I've never been able to talk to anybody about this before. I'm afraid of what my parents would do or say. I'm afraid of what, my teachers would say. And I think it's really important to give people that freedom and security and comfort to share what they feel honestly, knowing that if we talk about it, very seldom do our feelings become our outcomes. But if we bury it and it's stuck inside, it creates that adversarial energy that then can lead to that expression of these absolutely heinous acts that we see all around us.
Yeah, I remember growing up and thinking back to just being in school. I grew up in New Jersey, but at Catholic school, 1st through 8th, and I think it was the generation, of course, but no one talked about their feelings much at all. On the elementary level, you just weren't really told to do that. And I think we've come a long way. And I think social media, that's a great resource for people. You look on TikTok or you look on Instagram and you see someone that feels the same way you do, or maybe is able to say the word depressed, or a boy or man can cry. I mean, think about father's time growing up. It's like men didn't cry. It seems bizarre now to me, and maybe that is still the perception, but you're right in terms of being able to talk about it. And I know the families are always asked, so like, were there any signs? And I did interview Paul Holes, who was part of solving the Golden State Killer case. And I asked him about Richard Allen in Delphi. And I said, can he just be a normal dad and then just one day wake up in his 40s and decide he's going to do this? And he said, well, he could have been thinking about it and going down there and fantasizing about it way before he even did it. So the answer was yes. And he said to me as well, there could also be years that go in between, like with BTK and killing people. And I think that with Kohberger, we think of a reason why. I think that studying these killers, I think this is who he aspired to be. I think that was his motive.
Yeah.
Interesting. Susan, we've talked about so many, you brought up so many very infamous cases here today. I'm wondering, you've covered many of them closely, as you said, in the courtroom. Have they had any emotional impact on you that you can tell, or do you think they have, and if so, what?
Well, the Delphi case was different for me because I was closest to their families and seeing the crime scene photos there. So I understand why some of the family members in the Kohberger case did not want it to go to trial, because it's difficult for the families, to say the least. I'm putting it mildly, with the crime scene photos and everything coming out because they show it in court. And the judge, of course, is usually sensitive and tells the family a day before. It is able to do that. But I think with trials, you can get caught up in the fight of it, if you will. And I think we saw that with O.J. Simpson. Remember on late night TV, they had like the flying Itos for Judge Ito or the dancing Itos. It became bizarre, like a sideshow. So you could get caught up in what side's winning, what side's losing. And I think with the Casey Anthony trial, you kind of lost sight of 3-year-old Kaylee, who she was accused of murdering, found not guilty. So you can get caught up, I was, on, okay, what did the defense say this day? What was the prosecution saying on this day? With Jodi Arias, same thing with the lawyers. And also being on the other side of it, Kirk Nurmi was Jodi Arias's attorney, and he said to me that we're now friends, and he said, every day it was people criticizing me, and he said I was depressed after I didn't want to be a lawyer anymore.
Wow.
He ended up being diagnosed with cancer, and he said, believe it or not, Susan, that saved me. He fought every day. He lost a lot of weight. He's no longer a lawyer. He was speaking to big crowds and inspirational speaker now, because he said, I hit rock bottom. I didn't want to live, because of people were equating his defense with Jodi Arias, who was found guilty of killing Travis Alexander. So I think it can be traumatizing, if you will, for even the defense attorneys, who everyone looks at as kind of stoic and can criticize in a way. And he said, I wanted to get off the case, and I was told no. But so that's
Wow.
an instance of that.
Was he a public defender? Is that why he couldn't get off the case?
Yeah. Yes. And he's like, I wanted to, basically,
Yeah.
begged to, and they were like, no.
It's
So-
it's just so interesting you talk about that, because obviously he had one experience, but you talk about a lawyer like Mark Garagos, who's been on so many of these top, most infamous cases. I think he defended. Did he defend Michael Jackson? I want to say he defended Michael Jackson.
Menendez, Scott Peterson.
Yes, Scott Peterson.
Yes,
going
Michael
through,
Jackson. Yeah.
and he seems to relish all the attention and all of this sort of stuff. I don't know if you know Garagos at all.
I talked to him once on the phone. I think he does. I mean, he's like Teflon. I think it also depends on your personality and how he dives right. And I think it's his daughter, I believe, who is defended P. Diddy. So it's in his blood, if you will. And I think that he did it as a fight. And there are amazing defense attorneys that I got to know, Joey Jackson being my favorite, that I'd interview at CNN all the time, just a wonderful person. So, it all depends on the tactics, I believe, used, but everyone deserves to have a defense attorney. But you're right. Someone like a Garagos is very different than Kirk Nurmi. They're just different people. And it's like, some people love the fight,
Yeah. And
I think though that in that whole discussion, where do you feel like, because Andrew's original question, how do you feel like it has personally affected you, your psychology, your approach to life, your view of people? What do you feel like it's still?
You noticed I'm pivoting and avoiding the question.
A good reporter always follows up on it.
Well, this is how we divert. We say, what I do know, and we take you on another tangent. I think it's affected me in a positive way in most cases, because I'm able to get to know the families. Delphi's a perfect example, and think to myself, okay, if they could get through that, I could get through anything. If they're living this way, and I didn't even think about it when I got to know them, but it was kind of in the aftermath. And I wrote a book from their perspective and my experience. And it was, oh, wait a minute, I'm getting so much more from them without even knowing it, and just how strong they are. Stacey Chapin's another example. I recently saw her, and it's like, oh my gosh, if they could get through that, so can I. And I mentioned CrimeCon. It's every year, I think twice a year. They have, it sounds weird for those who don't know about it, but it's a place where victims' families go. And there's different panels, and it could be on DNA and technology and advancements, but really at the root of it are families connecting through pain and experience. And so my experience through all the coverage, and different cases are different for me. There's some cases where it's been so much at arm's length, like with Jodi Arias. It's more like, okay, what's in the rundown? That's why journalists can compartmentalize. You're like, okay, the B block, A block, I got to throw a commercial break. It's like flying a plane and not really emotionally connected to any of it. Not that you don't care, but you're really not there. So that was different for me when they sent me to Delphi, Indiana, because I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I don't have a deadline today. I could just sit with the family and eat with them. And I allowed myself to get closer than most because on the set, that really wasn't an option. So for me, it made me a better person. But it can be difficult, I think, in the coverage and what you see and you're exposed to. That's tough, but you kind of don't think of it. You just think of the families and think going back to meeting Joe Petito and crying. It's like, it's not about me. If it becomes about me, this is embarrassing. But you do have to recognize that you are a person and that you do have feelings through it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting. A couple of times you've talked about feeling embarrassed. I always talk about the purpose of embarrassment is it lets us know when we feel exposed. In our hierarchical world, we see that as bad and wrong and weak. Okay. From an equity standpoint, the value of embarrassment is exactly that, is it lets us see that we feel exposed in some way, and we have a choice in how we address that or feel about that. We can find that part of us that feels that emotion and say, you know what, it's okay, because it is okay to feel human. I think our socialization is that embarrassment is bad and showing tears and air quote weakness, when to me it takes often more courage to let those tears flow than it does to hold them back at times too. So I appreciate it. Like I said, I appreciate that about you, that when we've had some of those interactions that you were able to let that emotion out. And I think even when you talked about the parent, that Joe Petito who saw you tearful, that humanized you and let him know potentially that even his feelings were okay, even though he might not have shown them. You have shown to me in more situations the human side of what it is to also be somebody who's a reporter and somebody who's a journalist. And when we see what's changed in the media culture, we see the host chats, we see people sitting at the couches and talking and joking. We see more of the human side, whereas years ago you didn't do that. Your personal life was your personal life. So
Yeah,
I personally appreciate, and I hope that you could look at those feelings of embarrassment within you when you feel them and say, hey, that's okay, and love every part of you, as I say.
That's a great point, because you're right on how much it's changed. Like, as journalists, when I first started, I mean, you couldn't say a word or show any emotion or feeling. It was just the unspoken word. No one said, don't tear up. But a friend of mine, Lauren, who I mentioned, she hosts Hidden True Crime. It's her podcast. And she's been doing it for quite a while. And she did say to me, because she started in local news, and said, you don't have to, you don't have to be so cookie cutter. Everything doesn't have to be perfect. The way through connection is authenticity. And I took that to heart, and I believe it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's what makes you and the things you're doing. And it sounds like your efforts are always to not just report. You want to make a difference in the lives of those people that you touch. And you're helping to keep the community through those communications and through those conversations and through the books. And that's one thing you said, that's not a community people want to join. But it is one, though, of the mutual understanding. I think that's what we want, is we want to feel connection. We want to feel like people understand us. We want to feel loved and acknowledged. And I think that's critical to a lot of these populations, even those people who feel totally betrayed by the justice system. And I think that seems to be more and more people who really feel betrayed by the justice system. And the justice system isn't supposed to be about emotion. It's supposed to be about logic, and closing its eyes to all the other factors and looking for truth. And that's sometimes a very difficult road to walk when you are the part of the prosecution or the defense and even the prosecution, and part of the the whole legal system when it comes to DAs and situations like that, because they're supposed to be impartial, seeking truth, and that's where emotion is difficult in that.
You're right about that, the connection and coming together. Going back to Brian Koberger, Steve Gonzalez, during the victim impact statement, said in directing, he turned, it said on the podium, do not turn, and he turned right to Brian Koberger and he said, you thought you'd divide us, meaning the families. We've never been stronger. So you're right about even the families who are angry or handle grief differently. We're coming together and in that shared experience. And I believe that alleviates some of the pain.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I did a lot of reporting on, or not reporting, but commentary on Cooper Harris. That was the little boy who was left in the car and was, died of the heat stroke in Marietta, Georgia.
I remember that. It was horrible.
And
Horrible.
I posted those interviews on YouTube, that I did on YouTube and the channel. I had more just vicious and angry responses from those interviews than any other interview I had. And I really feel like people who felt this young innocent life was taken by one and or both parents, they were on both sides of that, who didn't seem to care about his needs, really drove people to these feelings of rage and anger and hatred that were being expressed in whatever ways and whatever channels or places they could. And I didn't respond to those, and I didn't remove them. I feel it's important to give people that place to express their
Hatred
feelings.
towards the parents.
And the people were just castigating the father and even the mother on some of the comments. And some of the media fed that, and that's where we have to be aware that of some of the shows that were feeding it, that I was commentating on and stuff, were feeding that frenzy. And again, that's not, we still live in a country where there's innocence before, you're innocent until proven guilty. And so many people want to rush to judgment with so many factors in our life. And I imagine even for some of these cases, we're finding that there were years later that people have been found innocent of cases, and they were jailed for life, and some were on death row, and then they're found innocent. It's like, oops, whereas those are lives that were also affected and become, traumatically affected by these cases. And I wonder, have you run into situations like that where you've seen a case that somebody was innocent or found innocent, and either people didn't want to believe that and or they absolutely were innocent?
This might be controversial depending on your viewers, but Karen Reed, I think, is not guilty. And I think that the jury came to the right conclusion. But you mentioned this with that hot car death, that horrific case we covered. And no matter what case, here's an example. I interviewed a New York Times bestselling author, wrote about 25 books. This was his first true crime book on Koberger and the case. And he said, Susan, my publisher and myself have gotten death threats. I think that true crime has also become so divisive that people tend to shift their anger. And it feels like at times sides are being taken. Now, my belief, I didn't have a belief going there, but I went to the trial. I was outside and interviewed a few people, and then spoke to my good friend Cheryl McCullum, who's a CSI. And just at first I just thought, because I had heard whispers in the media that maybe she was drinking, she hit her boyfriend, didn't know she did it, and that's it. But then the more that started to be uncovered and the more I watched with trials. But if you want to talk about a divide, I've had people know, and I don't say this often, I did one show on it. It's not like I walk around day to day and talking about Karen Reed. I truly don't. But I've had people who I like and respect kind of look at me weird, like, what? But it's not like I'm picketing outside of the courthouse. So it's become divisive, true crime, and what you believe to be true. There are people who truly, truly believe that Richard Allen in the Delphi case is innocent. I get that every single day on my page, every single day. And they have the right to think that. I understand why they would think that, because there was so much secrecy, if you will, and no cameras in the courtroom. So I understand that. I do. But I was in the courtroom, and I believe the jury got it right. Same with Brian Kobergers. There's even a nickname for them, the Pro-burgers, who get on the side of a guy. And what's most shocking to me, I've never heard Richard Allen say he's innocent ever out of his mouth. In fact, he confessed to his wife and mother 60 times in prison. With Koberger, he pled guilty, won't appeal. I've never heard him say he's not guilty. In fact, his attorney said on his behalf, put in the plea for him early on, not guilty. But there are people out there who are fighting for these two like it's their own child. And it's bizarre. And I don't know why that is, but it's a phenomenon that I've seen, that I don't mind you having a different opinion. In fact, I welcome that, and to have that discussion. But to have so much vitriol and hate about someone who you think is wrongly accused, or someone said to me, which is just kind of says it all. How can you think Richard Allen is guilty and Karen Reed's innocent? Well, I think they're two different. What do you mean? Like I'm supposed to think one way down every case? That's weird to
Right.
even say. So it's
Yeah.
become that divided. It almost feels as divided as politics for some. It's really bizarre. That's a weird side of it that maybe you're not exposed to. And if you're not, that's great.
I mean, the most divided verdict was the OJ verdict, right? Like there were so many people on both sides of that who were passionate.
And think about it, pre-social media, like there was no.
That's what I want to bring up to you. We talk about the changes in media and whatnot. What would that trial look like today? Somebody of that magnitude on a celebrity level, accused in such a grisly crime, with social media amplifying all of that. What do you think that would be like today?
Kim Goldman has a podcast. It's called Media Circus, and it would be that. It'd be media. But now, media. What is media? Is it back when I grew up, the few channels and CNN and Fox News came later, and then MSNBC? But it's what is the media? So now it's everybody showing up. I saw that with Delphi because the court system is kind of behind on this, and they don't know who to give credentials to. And sometimes there's a lottery, and sometimes you just. For the Koberger victim impact statements, I got to know Surviving the Survivor. Joel is his name. It turns out we grew up 15 minutes from each other in New Jersey, but great guy. I've been on his show, and we waited in that line for 12 hours together. So that's what it looks like. That's what the OJ case would have looked like. I mean, people camping out and wanting to get in, and it's become this like, what the judge who was originally put on the Richard Allen case in Delphi, he said, I can't do this. I'm out. He didn't want the attention. And he said, it's the media's and the public's bloodlust to know. And so that's a chapter in my book. It comes up, bloodlust, like that. There's so much that you want to know and want to see. And I was right there. I wanted to see the victim impact statements. I was there, but who knows? I don't know if you have to make the courtrooms bigger or what it's going to end up looking like with the media change.
It's an interesting concept, that bloodlust. I do feel like that plays into it to some degree, but there's also the matter of the public interest.
Yeah.
The public has a right to know these things. And especially when you're talking about, you're a parent, Susan, Dr. E, you're a parent, I'm a parent. When you have children out there, you don't want that to happen to your kids, and you want to be able to understand why this stuff happens and how it can be stopped in the future if possible.
Yeah.
Well, I think that all plays into these trials.
Yeah, that was the argument in Delphi about the no cameras in the courtroom. And now it's an argument in Koberger where all the families are together saying, look, the Freedom of Information Act, of course, but they don't get to see the crime scene photos because they'd be all over the internet. Like that's, so I believe there has to be a line where the judge makes a call on like what the public has access to. But yeah, I do believe in cameras in the courtroom. Absolutely. And the right to see.
Yeah. And I think from the standpoint of how we, with all the range of emotions, I look at it that control is an illusion based in fear. Often we as parents, we want that illusion of control, that if we know more of what's going on around us, then we can prevent our kids from experiencing the pains that may affect them in life. We also live in what I call that hierarchical world that's based in those four dichotomies of good and bad, right and wrong, strong and weak, and win and lose. And whether it's a legal case, a political case, about religion, many of our opinions, once we form an opinion, that has to be the right opinion because we don't like to feel wrong. Because if we're wrong, then there's something bad about us, and then we show weakness, and then we lose. So when we pick a side, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance out there that we have two competing belief systems, and we buy into one and have to hold on to that one, often to save face, even though then what we do is we deny truth. And that's often then where we lose really what justice is really meant to be. And we're often not rehabilitating those people who commit crimes. We're keeping them in holding pens, and they're only learning from their society around them to continue their issues. But getting back to the public, we have a huge amount of mistrust, and we have mistrust with people in positions of power. So if we don't trust those in the legal system, we don't trust the judges, we don't trust the politicians, we don't trust the DA, we don't trust who's even supposed to represent us, then yes, fear is going to run rampant. And when we feel that fear, then we're going to call on the protective emotions, anger, rage, arrogance, flippancy, defiance, sarcasm, and hatred, irritation. Those are those protective emotions I talk about. And I think if we looked at that and saw that more, and we all understood emotions, and went back to kids. So the reason I did the workshops in Haiti is I'd say, if we can help adults understand how they've been broken by dysfunctional beliefs in their culture, and we can help teenagers understand how they're being broken by some of these dysfunctional beliefs in culture, then we can change the world for our kids to grow up in a healthier environment. And that's really what this whole thing about why I'm loving talking to you, and why I brought on the Luckners, and why we brought in, the mom who canceled Christmas and things like that, because these are discussions that hopefully help people understand why we feel emotions. There are reasons to it. It makes sense when you look at it from a rational, logical state, that each emotion is there to tell us something, show us something, teach us something, do something for us, or help us do something for ourselves. So that's where I think that you're helping to bring some of that up and out, to have these discussions. And I thank you for that.
I agree. It's a great point. And right, it's about control. Having emotions and having opinions is wonderful. And being able to watch the court cases that you're interested in, and connecting to it, whether you've had something happen to you, or you feel jilted, if you will, by the justice system, or something personally happened to you with police officers. But that's right. It's about controlling how you express them. And because it can get a little bit, it's bizarre to me in terms of where they're projecting their anger.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's about that. I say there's the inverse proportional relationship. It's kind of mathematical, but that's emotional algebra, between the degree of emotion, the degree of weakness felt inside often is inversely proportional to the degree of stronger emotions, protective emotions shown on the surface. So that's how I know there's so many people who feel so helpless, disempowered, hopeless, mistrust, betrayed, violated, that we're seeing these huge swings in emotion. And when you look at it that way, yes, it does make sense. And people seeking justice in a world where it feels like often people get away with murder, literally.
True.
So I really appreciate you being here today again, Susan. It's been great to connect in this way, and to hear and experience your experiences. And always good to.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Fascinating discussion, Susan. Thank you for walking us through all of that stuff. And I feel like there's a whole nother episode that we could get to. I was prepared to, I mean, we're way over time here, but I was prepared to ask you about the Menendez brothers and whatnot.
I'll come back, I promise.
Yeah, we should. We should totally do another. Yeah.
Sounds
Thanks,
good.
guys. Great seeing you both.
Thanks for coming on, Susan. Take care. So interesting discussion, Dr. E.
Absolutely. Yeah. She's awesome. She's absolutely amazing. I've always enjoyed working with her. It is truly an honor to return the favor back and work with people who you work with. And I have such respect for her. And I had a lot of respect for the job of the, a lot of the anchors on these stories, and just the job they do in general, and often how they've become the targets for people who have their trust issues. And, we all can look at the origins of what's happened with our media and look at that. Whereas I think so many journalists are unfairly targeted when their job is to promote truth and to share things honestly. Now, does that sometimes go astray? It can. And that's why we want to look at really having systems in place in our media system, systems in place in our legal system, systems in place in our political system that give us those checks and balances to find people who are more objective and can help us to talk through these things and understand the range of emotions that we might go through that might close our eyes to truth, as I say.
Yeah. And just going back to Susan too, I mean, she might be one of the foremost crime reporters in the country at this point. I mean, I was thinking about like who has covered such a breadth of cases, and maybe it was like Barbara Walters, right? But Barbara Walters died several years ago. I feel like Susan may be the heir apparent there or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fascinating career.
Yeah. Well, Always a pleasure, Andrew. And if you watch this, Luckner, we're thinking about you. I know he watches some of these from Haiti, and he's recovering right now. So always sending you love, brother, and always sending you love too, Andrew. So appreciate you all. So until next time.